Let's talk about autoscaling, horizontal pod autoscaling. Kubernetes has the possibility to automatically scale pods based on metrics. Kubernetes can automatically scale a deployment, a replication controller, or a replica set. In Kubernetes 1.3, scaling based on the CPU usage is possible out of the box. With alpha support, application-based metrics are also available, like queries per second or average request latency. You need to make some modification to enable this. The cluster has to be started with the environment variable enable custom metrics to true. This is probably going to change in the future because this is still in the alpha stage and they are going to make some improvements. Autoscaling will periodically query the utilization for the targeted pods. By default, this is every 30 seconds, but that can be changed using the horizontal pod autoscaler sync period when launching the controller manager. If you would want to change this default value, you can, but it needs to be done in the initialization scripts when the controller manager starts on the master node. Autoscaling will use Heapster, the monitoring tool, to gather its metrics and make scaling decisions. Heapster must be installed and running before autoscaling will work, so make sure that you followed the demo that will enable Heapster. So here is an example. You run a deployment with a pod with a CPU resource request of 200 M. 200 M means 200 milli CPU, or also sometimes called 200 millicores. 200 M is actually 0.2, which is 20% of a CPU core of the running node. If the node has 2 cores, it is still 20% of a single core. So it's absolute numbers. You can introduce, for instance, autoscaling at 50% of the CPU usage, which is 100 milli CPU. Horizontal autoscaling will increase or decrease pods to maintain a target CPU utilization of this 50, or 100 milli CPU, or 10% of a core within this pod, so a core on this node. This is a pod that you can use to test autoscaling. Here we have a deployment, and in the specification we are going to use a Google image. It's an image that has a web server that is going to do some calculations if you visit the website. To make this work, we're going to specify resources, and we're going to request the request CPU 200 milli CPU. This means that we are requesting that our pod can use 200 milli CPU. We can use more, but Kubernetes can use this 200 milli CPU for scheduling purposes. It will not put this pod on a node that doesn't have 20% of a core available anymore. For us, in this example, this 200 M is also needed for our autoscaling. So this example is an autoscaling specifications. This object is of kind horizontal pod autoscaler. It has a name, also a specification, and here we're going to say that we are going to use a deployment that needs to scale. The minimum of the replicas is going to be 1 and the max replicas is 10, and the target CPU utilization percentage is 50%. 50% of, if we go back to the previous slide, then it is 50% of this CPU that we requested. So the target is going to be 100 milli CPU. When it goes higher than 100 milli CPU, more instances will be launched until we reach 10 replicas. If it is less than 50%, then pods will be removed until we hit the minimum, which in this case is 1. In the next demo, I will show you how that works.